Okay, folks, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. Um, okay, hold on. Because I don't see the show. Hmm, okay, okay, cool, cool. Okay, so I see that the stream is it is going. Hold on, hold on. Okay, hold on. Okay. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna try to go um as much as I can today. Um, I want to talk a little bit about markets, and then I want to talk a little bit about Africa, if I can. Um, okay, cool, cool. Okay, so we got this going right here. Iran's oil lifeline has been left untouched in the conflict. What happens if it's seized? Okay. Krong Island, a small strip of land in the northern Persian Gulf, is widely considered one of Iran's most sensitive economic targets. Okay, the island has been left untouched. However, during nearly 2 weeks of the U.S. and Israeli-led war on Iran, analysts say an attempt to attack or seize Iran's strategic oil hub is likely to be fraught with risk. Okay, the prospect of a U.S. move to seize Karg Island, a strategically vital hub often referred to as Iran's oil lifeline, is considered extremely high risk, both from a geopolitical and economic standpoint. Okay, the 5 mile long Coral Island, which is located about 15 miles off the coast of mainland Iran in the waters of the northern Persian Gulf, has been left untouched through nearly 2 weeks of U.S. and Israeli led strikes against Iran. Okay, the Trump administration has discussed seizing the island, according to an Axios report on March 7th, citing for unnamed sources with knowledge of the discussions. Okay, White House officials have previously said they expect oil prices to fall dramatically once Operation Epic Fury comes to an end. While White House Press Secretary Caroline Levitt has said the president wisely keeps all options on the table. Okay. Karg Island has been thrust into the global spotlight because it is regarded as one of Iran's most sensitive economic targets. The terminal accounts for around 90% of the country's crude exports and has a loading capacity of roughly 7 million barrels per day. Analysts say that any attempt to attack or seize it would require a ground troop operation, which the U.S. appears reluctant to undertake. An attack would also likely prompt a sustained increase to already soaring oil prices. So, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has previously refused to rule out deploying American ground forces in Iran, but said the U.S. won't get bogged down in the country. Okay. Francis Galgano, an associate professor in military geography, environmental security specialist at Villanova University in Pennsylvania, said the location of Karg Island is important because it sits in deep water that enables the approach of oil supertankers. Okay, I will put on my war hat. If the objective is to win the war quickly, you destroy or capture Karg immediately. Gargano told CNBC by email, adding that any such attempt would create maximum leverage over Tehran. Okay, nonetheless, taking the small island would be no mean feat, Gargano said. It would involve moving a considerable number of ground combat troops into the region. I estimate about 5,000 to take and hold the island. Okay. He added, all of this, of course, affects global oil markets, but they are already being affected. Okay. Oil prices have been extremely volatile since the. Okay. Okay, oil prices have been extremely volatile since the U.S. and Israel launched airstrikes on Iran on February 28th. Iran has retaliated by targeting ships trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which several incidents reported in recent days. The narrow waterway is a key maritime corridor that connects the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. Roughly 20% of global oil and gas typically passes through it. The international benchmark Brent crude futures with May delivery traded off by 1% at 99.45 cents per barrel on Friday, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures with April delivery were last seen 2% lower at $93.81. Okay. If Karg Island were disabled, analysts at J.P. Morgan said the loss of Iran's storage buffer and the scarcity of viable export alternatives would rapidly trigger upstream shut-ins across major Southwest fields. Okay. With production near 3.3 MBD and exports around 1.5 MBD, as much as half of national output would be at risk if the hub remains offline, and the previously assumed 20-day buffer would vanish from day one, they said in a note published Sunday. Okay, security control. Richard Goldberg, senior advisor at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a nonprofit research institute considered hawkish on Iran, said he understood the hesitation to do anything that could knock out Iranian oil production at a time when markets are jittery and the potential for regime change is still in play. That may change quickly as we take back security control of the Strait of Hormuz and we get a clear picture if the regime is able to hang on to power a while longer, Goldberg told CNBC by email. At that point, we absolutely need to consider disabling the export terminal or otherwise cutting off the regime's financial lifeline indefinitely, he added. U.S. President Donald Trump on Friday suggested that an end to the Iran war was not imminent, reportedly saying that America has ammunition and plenty of time to keep fighting. His comments come shortly after Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, also struck a defiant tone as he insisted the Strait of Hormuz must remain closed as a tool to pressure the enemy. Okay. Iran's enormous scale and mountainous topography mean the U.S. mobilizing any conventional ground forces in the region would require hundreds of thousands of troops, according to Alex Politis, a senior non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council think tank. Okay. Any use of ground forces would likely be limited to special operations forces for specific missions. Police just said Wednesday in a note without referring specifically to Iran's Karg Island. Okay. So there we go with that. Okay. So I'm going to remove that. I'll do. Okay. Um. Okay. Hold on. Okay. Hold on. Give me a second. Okay. So. Tinubu approves procurement. This is a Rise News. Okay, Tinubu approves procurement of military hardware to boost anti-terror operations. Okay. President Tinubu approves fresh military equipment procurement and security forces intensify operations against insurgents and terrorist groups nationwide. Okay. President Bola Tinubu has approved the procurement of additional military hardware to strengthen the armed forces of Nigeria in their ongoing campaign against insurgency and terrorism across the country. Okay, the Minister of Defense, General Christopher Musa, disclosed this on Thursday while speaking with journalists after a high-level security briefing with the president. Okay, according to Musa, the meeting enabled the service chiefs to brief Tinubu extensively on ongoing military operations and the prevailing security situation across the country. Okay, the meeting enabled Mr. President to gain direct insight into developments on the ground, the minister said. Okay. Musa noted that recent media reports have not always captured the full scope of the military's activities in confronting security threats. Okay, while acknowledging that there had been recent attacks in some parts of the country, he stressed that the armed forces have continued to respond decisively and inflict significant losses on terrorist groups. Okay. According to him, several high-ranking militant commanders have been neutralized in recent operations, while troops have also seized various assets belonging to insurgents. The defense minister paid tribute to soldiers who lost their lives in the line of duty, describing their sacrifices deeply regrettable, but emphasizing that the resolve of the armed forces remains firm. Okay. The commitment of our armed forces to ensuring the safety and security of Nigerians is unwavering, Musa said. Okay. He appealed for patience and continued support from the public, explaining that terrorist groups often intensify their activities during the Ramadan period. Okay, the minister noted that military commanders have adjusted operational strategies accordingly to counter the trend. Okay. Musa expressed confidence that with the approval for additional military equipment and improved cooperation among security agencies, Nigeria's armed forces will prevail in the fight against terrorism. Our agencies are working in concert, fully committed to winning this war, he added. Deji Olumuyo, follow us. Okay. Okay. Okay, cool. Okay. So we're going to cover Liberia now. Well, this was July 18, 2025. It's an older article, but okay. Hold on. Okay, so we're gonna cover this. Okay, enough is enough. Liberians rally against Bokai over broken promises, job losses. Okay, Liberians march through Monrovia demanding accountability, justice for war crimes, and action on President Bokai's unfulfilled campaign promises. Okay. Okay. Okay, hundreds of angry Liberians poured into the streets of Monrovia on Thursday, chanting "Enough is enough" and demanding accountability from President Joseph Boake's administration. Okay, the protest, led by opposition figure Malbu Morlu, is the largest public demonstration since Boake assumed office last year, on a wave of promises to reform governance and improve living conditions. Okay. Protesters carried placards and voiced frustrations over what they described as broken campaign pledges, politically motivated firings, and the government's failure to establish a long promised war crimes court. Okay. I am very angry. This is why I'm in the street today, said Victoria Roberts, a local businesswoman. I am in the street to remind my government of their past promises that they made to lead the Liberian people. How can you say that you come to better the lives of the people, but then you come and took people from jobs? Is that what you call betterment? A central demand of the protest is the establishment of a war crimes tribunal to prosecute individuals accused of atrocities committed during Liberia's two civil wars, which spanned from 1989 to 2003. Hey, we the motorcyclists, we want a war crimes court, said Douglas Smith, on an opposition supporter. The war crimes court should not be for Prince Johnson alone. General Butt Naked needs to go to the war crimes court too. Okay, many demonstrators expressed frustration that key figures allegedly involved in wartime atrocities continue to live freely or hold political influence. Okay. Liberians voted for Joseph Boakai because he has 40 years experience, said protester Musu Dennis. So he should start to use that 40 years experience for the Liberian people, not for him to come and put tension on the Liberian people. We are suffering. Let Joseph Boakai do the right thing. Okay. The protest was largely peaceful, moved through the capital toward the executive mansion to deliver a formal petition. While no violence was reported, Monrovia's typically bustling streets were subdued, with many residents staying home due to fears of potential unrest. In addition to the call for justice, demonstrators criticized the government's economic performance and accused it of targeting political opponents through dismissals and intimidation. Okay, we want rule of law, not rule of politics. One protester shouted through a megaphone as the crowd moved past government buildings. Okay, President Boake's office has not yet issued a response to the protest or addressed specific demands raised. Bullleafy and Omi. Okay, cool. All right. Okay. Nigeria records lowest petrol imports as Dangote refinery dominates supply. Okay, Nigeria's petrol imports fell sharply in February as Dangote refinery drove domestic supply, meeting about 90% of market demand. Okay. Nigeria recorded its lowest petrol import levels in February 2026 as domestic refining, led largely by Dangote Petroleum Refinery, accounted for the overwhelming share of fuel supply to the local market, according to the latest industry data. Okay. An official fact sheet on Nigeria's midstream and downstream petroleum operations showed that total daily supply of petrol fell sharply from 64.9 million liters per day in January to 39.6 million liters per day in February. Okay, the decline represented a 25.4 million liter per day reduction, equivalent to a 39.1% drop in total supply during the period. The report attributed the decline primarily to a significant drop in petrol imports, indicating that Nigeria relied far less on foreign refined products in February than it did in the previous month. Okay. Despite the reduction in total supply, domestic refining contributed the bulk of available petrol in the country. The fact sheet showed that average domestic petrol supply in February stood at 36.5 million liters per day, meaning that locally refined fuel accounted for roughly 92% of the total product supply during the month. Okay. This indicates that imported petrol represented only about 3.1 million liters per day, or roughly 8% of total supply, underscoring the growth role of domestic refineries in Nigeria's fuel supply chain. Okay. The figures reflect an emerging structural shift in the downstream sector as local refining capacity, particularly from the Dangote refinery, gradually reduces the country's dependence on imported fuel. Okay, the document also stated that the calculation of national fuel sufficiency for February included gross PMS stock held at the Dangote refinery, further highlighting the refinery's role in stabilizing domestic supply. Okay. As a result, Nigeria maintained a 31-day petrol sufficiency level during the month, meaning the country held enough fuel stocks to meet demand for approximately 1 month. Fuel consumption data indicated that domestic demand remained relatively stable. Okay. Average daily petrol consumption stood at 36.6 million liters, which is slightly below the total daily supply of 39.6 million liters. Okay, this suggested that available fuel volumes were sufficient to meet market demand despite the sharp decline in imports. Okay. However, broader consumption statistics show that overall petrol demand across the economy remained elevated. Based on the national consumption benchmark of 50 million liters per day, actual petrol usage measured through truck out volumes averaged 56.9 million liters per day, representing about 13.8% higher than the benchmark level. Okay. In the same vein, diesel demand also exceeded projections by a wide margin. While the benchmark for diesel consumption was 14 million liters per day, actual average daily usage reached 200.3 million liters, meaning diesel consumption was approximately 45% above the expected level. Okay. Besides, aviation fuel demand remained largely stable relative to projections. The benchmark consumption level for aviation turbine fuel was 3 million liters per day, while actual daily usage averaged 2.9 million liters, representing a marginal 3.3% shortfall. Okay. Domestic refining activity also extended beyond petrol production. Local refineries supplied an average of 8.2 million liters per day of diesel during February, although operational disruptions affected some facilities. Okay. In addition, three modular refineries collectively supplied an average of 0.368 million liters per day, contributing modest but steady volumes to domestic fuel supply. Okay. Meanwhile, the Walter Smith refinery continued the introduction of hydrocarbons into its processing system, signaling ongoing efforts to ramp up refining activity within Nigeria's modular refinery segment. Across the broader petroleum products market, consumption remained robust. Okay. Cooking gas demand also remained strong, with average daily consumption reaching 4,194 metric tons. Nigeria's strategic fuel reserves remain adequate across key products. Diesel reserves were sufficient for 48 days. Aviation fuel stocks could last 73 days, while cooking gas reserves stood at 22 days. Beyond liquid fuels, Nigeria's gas sector also maintained strong supply levels. Total average daily gas supply in February reached 4.771 billion standard cubic feet per day. Okay. Of this volume, 3.018 billion cubic feet per day were supplied to Nigeria LNG plant, while 1.763 billion cubic feet per day was delivered to the domestic market. Okay. Similarly, gas utilization across sectors showed that power generation consumed 0.536 billion cubic feet per day. Commercial users accounted for 0.628 billion cubic feet, and gas-based industries utilized about 0.440 billion cubic feet per day. Meanwhile, several strategic gas infrastructure projects continue to advance. The Ajakuta Kaduna Kano gas pipeline reached 79.23% completion, while the OB3 River Niger crossing project stood at 59.50% completion. Other projects include the Escravos ODD pipeline expansion at 76.34%, the ODD Warri expansion project 11.18%, and the ELPS Midline compressor project, which has reached 93% completion. Emmanuel Eda. Okay. So this shows the decrease in their imports, as well as their continuing construction of these pipeline projects, which continue. So yeah. Okay. So I said yeah. So I was go ahead and present today. I'm gonna go ahead and shut it down for right now. Um, I'll probably broadcast again later again tonight, and we'll continue. So go ahead and get the likes up. Thank you for your support, and catch you guys later.